Hello, hello. I just created a brand new Phoenix 1.8 app, and I want to see what the robots get wrong by reading this AGENTS.md. Now, just to be clear, the purpose of this file is not really to communicate best practices to developers. I know some people use it like that, or I heard some people use it like that, but you can still learn a few cool things from it. So let's dive into it. Uh, Quickly, the first thing, project guidelines. Look at this mix pre-commit. I saw this earlier. I read like a little bit of this. If we go to our mix file, you'll see this. There's a new pre-commit thing here, and this is again, I assume, so that the agent itself can like kind of validate that the changes it's made aren't breaking things. But it's cool. You know, you're compiling, you're cleaning up unused dependencies, formatting, and testing. So cool thing to have anyway. So there you go. Let's go back to the file. Use the already included and available rec library for HTTP requests. Avoid, I'm curious what we're avoiding. I imagine robots try to include a whole bunch of libraries by default, and rec is already included. Rec's awesome, by the way, so definitely use it. Let's look at Phoenix 1.8 guidelines. Always begin your live view templates with layouts. Right, the layouts change. Right, it's now a component which wraps. This is hard to read. Which wraps all inner content. Right, so makes sense to want to do that. The module is alias, so you can use it without aliasing it again. That makes sense. The robot probably tries to alias it. Anytime you run into errors with no current scope assigned, this is interesting. So the robot fails to authenticate, follow the authenticated routes guidelines, pass current scope to layout, and let's see, always fix this error by moving the route to the proper live session. So that's interesting. Seems like the robot keeps putting probably a live view outside of the live session, doesn't have the current scope, fails. So it's kind of like a common fix. Let's see, Phoenix 1.8, move the Flash group component to the layouts module. You are forbidden. You are forbidden from calling Flash group outside of the layouts module. Nice. All right. Seems like that's a common issue. Out of the box, core components imports an icon, yada, yada, yada. Always use the icon for icons. Never use heroicons. So this makes sense. I think there's a library, and this is like, I don't know, Phoenix 1.5 maybe. I can't remember exactly when. I think we used to call this module. So that's what they're trying to avoid doing, or telling the robot not to do. Always use the imported input component. Input is still using, okay. Yeah, it seems like maybe they use a vanilla inputs and then there's errors and stuff. Let's see, if you override the default input class with your own values, no default classes are inherited, so your custom classes must fully use this input. That's interesting, that makes sense. It probably thinks it's overriding and it'll like inherit those classes, but if you know how Phoenix components work, they are just adding classes, right? Typically, if you pass it in a list. So interesting thing there. Let's take a look at the JS and CSS guidelines. Use tailed CSS classes to be polished, responsive, and visually stunning interfaces. That's interesting. I wonder if this is a little bit of like create polished, responsive, and visually stunning interfaces, right? It's kind of like giving context to your kind of like prompt engineering, right? Like what kind of image do you want to generate, right? That kind of thing. So cool to know that this is maybe that creates nice interfaces. No longer needs tailwind config, yada, yada, yada. That makes sense. That's kind of an error that it runs into, I guess. Always use and maintain this import syntax in the app.css file for projects generated within Phoenix New. All right. Never use apply. Nice. Always manually write your own Tailwind-based component instead of using DaisyUR for a unique world-class design. Nice. Another thing, another little tip here. I think like that's right. Another little prompt thingy so that it knows what kind of thing to generate, or it adds a little flavor to it, I imagine. Out of the box, only the app.js and app.css bundles are supported. You cannot reference an external vendor script in the layouts. You must import the vendor deps into apps. Never use inline custom JS scripts within templates. Makes sense. Let's see, UI UX design guidelines. Produce world-class UI designs with focus on usability, aesthetics, and modern design principles. Cool. It makes sense. Again, I think these things probably matter. I don't know how many iterations Chris and whoever else helped write this like went through to get to these little tweaks, right? But I think those kind of things matter. Implement subtle micro interactions, button hover effects. Oh, cool. Yeah, that makes sense. Rather than like a very vanilla button, right? Like it might have like the little hover effect and all this stuff. Ensure clean typography, space out for a refined premium look. Nice. Focus on delightful details like hover effects, loading states, and smooth page transitions. Cool, makes sense. Let's take a look at Elixir guidelines. list to the top. Elixir lists do not support index-based access. Yeah, I think I've seen this before as well, actually. Never do this, right? Like it's trying to do my list element 0, right? Or element 1 or whatever, which cannot be done. So instead, always use enum pattern matching, or list for index-based access. Cool. Yeah, that makes sense. Elixir variables are immutable, but can be rebound. So for block expressions like if, cast, con, you must bind the result of the expression to a variable, right? That makes sense, right? It seems like the robot's trying to do something like this, where if you had socket out here assigned to something, not there, right? But like socket, assign, socket, I don't know, something like that, right? The robot might think this actually overrides that, but it doesn't, right? So it's telling it you gotta like assign socket here and then do other operations. That checks out. Let's jump up here or jump down here. Never nest multiple modules in the same file, as it can cause cyclic dependencies and compilation errors. This is a good one to know, I think, for everybody. I mean, I don't really know that I nest multiple modules in the same file all the time. When might I do this? Maybe for like a struct or something, but that's interesting. Never use map access syntax on structs, as they do not implement the access behavior. That makes sense. Right, you want to access structs like this, but it makes sense like it's kind of doing its Elixir based on some other languages maybe. Nice. Elixir standard library has everything necessary for date and time manipulation. Yeah, I like this. I run into a lot of code bases that still have like timex, which was great, by the way. There's no shade on timex here. We needed it at the time, but I think there's so much stuff in date and datetime and calendar and all that stuff. So that's a cool tidbit. Don't use string to atom. Yep, it's a memory leak risk. If you don't know this is kind of a security concern with Elixir. The atom table is finite. So if you have any user input that is dynamically creating atoms, you are going to have a bad issue at some point. Predicate function name should not start with is and should end in a question mark. Names like is thing should be reserved for guards. I got you. Yeah. And in fact, predicate function names usually we have a question mark. Oh yeah, there it is. And should end with a question mark. Yeah. Is something else is we use it for guards as convention. That makes sense. Built-in OTP primitives require names in the child spec. Got it. I don't know when the robot's doing that, but use async stream for concurrent operations with back pressure. Nice. The majority of times we want to pass timeout infinity as an option. Nice. Interesting note here for back pressure. I wonder what the robot makes of that. Don't know. All right, let's jump to mix guidelines. Read the docs and options before using tasks. By the way, this mix help task name. I do this all the time because I forget the options and stuff. So it's great to do that. But definitely take a look at that. But that's cool that it makes it do that because I'm sure the robot tries to guess things. To debug test failures, run tests in a specific file. Or let's see this, or run all previously failed tests with mixed test failed. By the way, if you don't know about mixed test dash failed, it's really neat. Like if you run your test suite and 2 tests failed, just run mixed test dash failed and only those 2 will run. It's super cool. Mixed steps clean all is almost never needed. I wonder when the robots do this, right? I could totally see it. It's like running, the agent's running or something, and it just cleans all the stuff. And probably not what you want. All right, Phoenix guidelines. Remember, Phoenix router scope blocks include an optional alias, which is prefixed for all routes within the scope. Always be mindful of this. I haven't run into a lot of these things. Oh, the scope. I got you. So this is hilarious. Okay. You never need to create an own alias for your route definitions. Yeah, I imagine that what the robot is trying to do is this, right? Like it's going to say, do this, right? And like it's duplicating because it doesn't, or creates an alias because it doesn't understand that this itself is going to be prepended here. It's kind of a gotcha, I think, for people who don't know that this is just kind of magically concatenated. So makes sense. Phoenix view is no longer is needed or included with Phoenix. Don't use it. That makes sense. I think I wrote a blog post about that at some point. Ecto guidelines. Always preload ecto associations and queries when they'll be accessed in templates. That makes sense. I imagine the robot doesn't know, and there's an error. The agent's running, and now there's an error there because it's not preloaded, right? Remember, import ecto query and other supporting modules when you write seeds. Makes sense. If you're seeding stuff, you want to insert them to database. Ecto schema fields always use string type even for text columns. Nice. I'm sure that's a common issue, right? Yeah. It generates a text column. It's going to think it's text, but it's needs to use a string. Active change to validate number does not support the allow nil option. By default, only run if a change is given field exists. Okay, yeah, that's funny. That makes sense. Those some of those things that the robot is just kind of like guessing, right? You must use active change to get field to access change set fields. Yeah, that makes sense. Fields which are set programmatically like user ID must not be listed in cast calls or similar for security purposes. I love this. I actually think this is something that people might run into, and that's kind of like if you think of this. Let me see, like a user, right? That doesn't make sense. Maybe post user ID, right? You might set the user ID and then pass this to post change set. No, thanks, robot. Right? And so what it's saying is like don't have this in cast kind of thing. Like this will be because if you have it in cast, you expect it here coming from the user or from some type of input, and therefore you could open yourself to some exploitations, like maybe someone's injecting a different user ID, all of a sudden they have access to different things, right? That kind of thing. So I think that's what that's saying. That's why it's important for security purposes. So cool little tidbit there. I don't know how many people know that or think about it. Let's talk about Phoenix HTML guidelines. Always use H for Heeks templates, right? Never use the EEX sigil. I think that's what that one is. That's funny. It makes sense. A lot of that has changed over the last few years. So always use the imported Phoenix component form and inputs for. Don't use form for and inputs for, right? Those are outdated. It makes sense that the robot is trying to use the old ones, and we have I don't know when this changed. It's not it's not recent, but it makes sense that the robots are trained on older data. When building form, always use the already imported to form. Yeah. Then access these forms in a template via form field. Yep. Makes sense. This is a sweet one. Add unique DOM IDs to key elements. When writing templates, these IDs can later be used in tests. I think this is a great one for all of us. Sometimes if I write a test, I'll go back and add the ID and whatnot, but this is a cool thing to just keep in mind as you're writing. And I imagine it makes sense if the robot is then writing the thing and then writes a test and then doesn't have the ID, it could get even more complicated. So like it might not know why the error's happening when we know. So makes sense. For app-wide template imports, you can import alias into the My App Web HTML helpers. That makes sense. So that's all automatically available and live use and all that jazz. Makes sense. I love this one. Elixir supports if-else, but does not support if-else-if or if-else-if. Never use else-if in Elixir. Always use case for multiple conditionals. If you've done any Elixir, of course, we know this, but it's funny that the robot is trying to write. I think this might be in Ruby or JavaScript. You can do these things. So if-else-if, right? You always want to do cons. Heeks requires special tag annotation if you want to insert literal curlies. Look at that. I actually didn't know this. If you want to show textual code snip in the page, you must annotate the parent tag with Phoenix no curly interpolation. No idea. I had no idea. It's not something I typically want to do, but that's cool. So it's not going to interpolate this, right? Because otherwise, if you do some, variable here, right, it's going to try to interpolate it. So that's what it's saying. You want to actually render those curlies without escaping. Cool. Yeah, nice. Heeks class attributes list supports list, but you must always use list syntax. You can use the class list syntax to conditionally add classes. Always do this for multiple class values. Right. So if we look at this, if you look at the class, it opens a little curly bracket and then the square brackets, right? And you can pass all these classes and always wrap ifs inside brackets with parens like done above. So, right, it's saying here it's using these little round what are they called? Parentheses. And never do this since it's invalid. No, the missing, right? It's just throwing them in there. There's no list, right? It's missing these kind of brackets there. That makes sense. And by the way, if you don't know this, if you have anything that, like if you have conditionals there, like this if condition, this one has an else, but if you had an if that returns a false or a nil, by default, this class attribute will ignore those. So it's pretty neat. Let's see. Never use enum each for non-for comprehensions for generating template content. instead use for item. Yeah, that makes sense. It's use for comprehensions kind of thing for Heeks templates. Heeks HTML comments use that syntax for template comments, right? So it's making sure you use that syntax. I don't know what the robot tries to use. Maybe just like regular HTML or something. I don't know. Heeks allows interpolation via and, but the only works within tag bodies. Always use the curly syntax for interpolation within tag attributes and for interpolation of values within tag bodies. Always interpolate block constructs. All right, that's a mouthful. I like that for these things they have examples though, so it's like always do this, right? We're interpolating here, and you have the if complex contract there. Never do this. Uh, I love the capital letters, right? Is like it seems like it must be that Chris or whoever's writing this has run into this a lot, or maybe it's just like a really frustrating one. Um, right, it's just putting like EX template style here's stuff, right? And doing the inverse here. So nice. All right, Phoenix Live View guidelines. Never use deprecated live redirect live path. Yeah, that makes sense. This is another one where right, Phoenix has changed, and so I'm sure the robot generates the old code, right? So use the link component with navigate and patch, and use the push navigate push patch from the live views. I love this. Avoid live components unless you have a strong specific need for them. Yes, that is a great advice for all of us. Just use function components. Live components existed before function components, and most of the times you just want a function component. Live view should be named like live with a live suffix. The And this is another one where it's already telling it, right? When you go to the router, the default browser scope is already aliased with the app web module. So you don't have to declare app web.weatherlive, right? So common things that it's probably hard for the robot to know, right? It's sort of like convention. The more convention, maybe the harder to know. I don't know. Remember, anytime you use Phoenix hook and that JS hook manages its own DOM, you must also set the Phoenix update ignore attribute. Nice. I wonder how the robot traverses between JavaScript and Elixir and all that jazz. I haven't done a lot of complex stuff with that. Never write embedded script tags and Heeks templates. Instead, always write your own scripts and hooks in the assets directory and integrate them with the file. Cool. Live view streams. Always use live view streams for collections for assigning regular lists to avoid memory ballooning and runtime termination with the following operations. I think this is cool advice for all of us. I think sometimes when we do regular collections, we might not even reach for streams immediately because we think it's fine for it to be in memory. But I don't know that we lose anything by using streams out of the box, right? So and then you're automatically protected from accidentally having like a ton of data in a socket or in a process and having memory issues. Basic append of n items is just stream like that. Resetting stream with new items. You can just pass reset true. Prepending to stream at -1, deleting items, stream delete. When using the stream interface in LiveView, the LiveView template must 1, always set Phoenix update stream on the parent element with a DOM ID, and 2, consume the stream name collection and use the ID as the DOM ID for each child. For a call like stream socket message in LiveView, the template would be like this, right? So that makes sense. It's just kind of teaching it about you need to have this Phoenix update stream right there. It needs to have the DOM, it needs to have an ID there, and we need to use this kind of ID right here. This ID, by the way, if you don't know, gets used right here. Right? So you need to do that so streams work correctly. LiveView streams are not enumerable, so you cannot use enum filter, enum reject, and then that makes sense. That it would think it's an enumerable, right? It's a collection that we keep working with. So, it teaches a little bit about resetting, filtering, that kind of thing. Makes sense. LiveView streams do not support counting or empty states. Another probably enumerable kind of confusion that it didn't strike me. I didn't think about, that we would confuse it, but that makes sense. If you need to display a count, you must track it using separate assigns. For empty states, you can use Tailwind classes, right? Got it. Yeah. All right. The above only works if the empty state is the only HTML block alongside the stream for comprehension. Yeah. Never use the deprecated Phoenix update append or prepend for collections. So if you don't know this, before streams came, there was you would tag the assign as I'm actually forgetting now, and you would actually tag it append or prepend in the template. So makes sense. All right, live view tests. Actually, I'm not even going to read this. Live view test. We should just have a use Phoenix test. No, worth looking into it. Module lazy HTML included for making your assertions. That makes sense. Lazy HTML, for those who don't know, live view, I think 1.1 introduced lazy HTML instead of Floki. Form tests are driven by live view test render, submit, and render change functions. Yep. Come up with a step-by-step plan that splits major test case into small, isolated files. Yeah, okay. Split your tests. Always reference in your test. That makes sense. Use the element helper, right? You can use this with a render submit and stuff like that. That makes sense. Never test against raw HTML. Yeah, I love to see this. I mean, again, use just Phoenix test. But if you're not using Phoenix test, I think this makes a lot more sense in your assertions. I love the never, explicitness there. Instead of relying on testing text content, which can change favor testing for the presence of key elements. Yeah. Focus on testing outcomes rather than implementation details. Yes, again, that makes sense. And I know robots can sometimes write some weird tests. Be aware that Phoenix component functions like form might produce different HTML than expected. Testing is the output HTML structure, not your mental model of what you expect it to be. That's funny. I don't know what the mental model that the robot has, but got to call it out. When facing test failures with element selectors, add debug statements to print the actual HTML, but use lazy HTML selectors to limit the output. So that's interesting. So we're rendering the HTML, we render from fragment, filter, inspect. That is interesting. It makes sense if the robot doesn't have access to the UI, right? Typically if I run into something, I use the open browser helper on the view to actually see what it's rendering. But unless you're using Tidewave or something, I imagine it doesn't have access to the UI, right? All right, let's look at form handling. So we already saw some Phoenix stuff, but I guess it has a special form handling section. If you want to create a form based on handle params event, right, it's using the toForm helper here. So probably what it's using, when you pass a map to toForm and assume said map contains the 4 params, which are expected to have string keys. Yeah, that's probably a good call out. Otherwise, it might confuse itself. You can also specify a name to nest the params, right? So user gets the user params. Oh, and you pass as user, yeah. Create a form from change sets. When using change set, the underlying data, form params, and errors are retrieved from it. The as option is automatically computed too. So if you have a user schema and you create a change set that you pass to toForm, once the form is submitted, the params will be available under user. Yeah, this makes sense. This is all kind of somewhat magical, I guess, right? It's sort of this coupling between change sets and how they render in the form and all this stuff. And, it makes sense that the robot wouldn't know these things. If the template for the form assign can be, in the template, the form assign, I might be misreading this, but anyway, I think there's a double form there. Might be the form assign. All right. Can be passed to the form function component. So it's saying for form. Always give the form an explicit unique DOM ID. Yeah, that makes sense. Avoiding form errors. Let's see. Always use a form assigned via toForm in the live view and the input component in the template. This has already been stated before. So I imagine, again, Chris or whoever was doing this beautiful work ran into this several times, right? It makes sense that the robot's probably using change sets instead of using the toForm, and it's using raw inputs instead of the input component. So it was probably running into issue. Never do this, right? So there you go. Yeah, it's trying to use a change set because that's what we used to do before the toForm helper. And I guess, well, I don't know. It's not showing the input here, but accessing the change set that way. You are forbidden from accessing the change set in the template as it will cause errors. I love that. It seems like someone's been bitten a lot of times by this. Never use form let in the template. Instead, always use form for. That's a cool one. I do think that we've seen this before, and it can cause kinds of issues. And drive all form references from the form assign as in form field. The UI should always be driven by a toForm assign in the live view module. So clearly, don't use change sets, use toForm is kind of the core lesson there. And we're done.